Hey guys, welcome to the Baker Vaporworks channel. And in this video, we're going to be rebuilding a set of carburetors from a Honda CB360. I'll show you how to tear them down, clean them properly, vapor blast them, and reassemble them just like new. So grab your tools and just follow along with me. We'll get started. First, what we need to do is separate these two carburetors by first removing the bridge that's between the two chokes. It's just a screw, loosen that, and you should be able to pull the bridge away. You'll then need to remove the four screws holding the mounting bracket to the carbs. From there, they should separate pretty easily. Just watch out for a small spring that's between the two throttle shafts as well. You don't want to lose that. So we'll go ahead and start on the carburetor that has the throttle linkage on it. I'm going to remove this bracket that holds the actual throttle cables to the carburetor and set that off to the side. Then we're going to start working on removing this linkage between the butterfly and the actual throttle lever. There's going to be two E-clips followed by two plastic washers that are under those E-clips. They're very small, so make sure you don't lose them. Once you've got those removed, you should be able to remove this bolt that holds the actual plungers inside of the linkage. So there's a couple tabs on here you're going to have to pry away from the bolt first. I used a small flathead screwdriver, then I grabbed an 8mm socket and loosened the bolt and was able to pull it out. Now, when you do pull this out, there's going to be a small spring and a small plunger on that spring. Sometimes they're not together, so you'll have to either grab like a pick or dump them out onto your table. But make sure you get those pieces out and you have them there. Once those are out, you should be able to remove the linkage. And inside that linkage is there's another plunger that goes pretty much the length of it. Mine didn't come out, but you saw the small one did. So when we clean this, the larger one should come out of there. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and put all the pieces back together so I don't lose them. So next, we're going to go ahead and start removing the throttle action. And there's just going to be a small E-clip on this as well, right on the shaft. You can pop that out. And that'll be followed by a metal washer as well as a plastic washer. Once you've got those removed, you can go ahead and actually remove the throttle linkage. It is spring loaded, so make sure you hold on to it when you pull it off. It might get away from you if you're not keeping a good grip on it. Once you've got that removed, you can see the spring is held in by a plastic bushing on that linkage. Just go ahead and set that aside, and we're going to go ahead and remove the bolt for the actual throttle. And on top of that bolt, there is a nut and a bracket in there. Sometimes you do have to loosen that first. In my case, I was able to get the bolt out just using a flathead screwdriver. Next, we're going to go ahead and start removing the float bowl. I like to remove the drain screw now while it's still attached to the actual carburetor. It makes it easy to hold on to just in case that drain screw is a little too tight. Once you do get it out, there is an O-ring on it. Sometimes it's stuck in the actual bowl itself, so just go ahead and get those two removed. Next, you can remove the four screws holding the bowl to the carburetor. One of the screws actually holds the idle adjustment screw down to the carburetor as well. So once I get that removed, I'm going to go ahead and just remove the idle adjustment screw as well. So now that we got the float bowl removed, we're going to go ahead and inspect the gasket. In my case, I'm just going to be replacing them. So I'm going to remove this gasket using a small pick. You can use a flathead screwdriver or something. Just be very careful not to damage the grooves on these bowls because they are made out of aluminum. Now we're going to inspect our float needle, and you can see when I touch the floats, there's no movement. So that's a tall tale sign that the needle needs to be replaced. So go ahead and remove the pin holding the float to the carburetor, and then you can remove the needle from the flow. And then test the button that's on top of it. Sometimes they're seized up, and sometimes they're just so worn out they don't have their full range of motion anymore. So that's definitely a part you want to replace. Now we can start removing our jets, and it doesn't matter which order we start removing them in. Just make sure you're using a good quality screwdriver that fits snugly into the head of the jet. They are made of brass, so it'll be really easy for you to strip them out if you're not using a good quality screwdriver. I'm also going to be reusing the OEM jets because I find that the jets you get in rebuild kits are of much less quality than the OEM. You can tell you've got an OEM jet by looking at it. You should see a Mikuni logo on it, usually on the side or on the top. The small pilot jet is the easiest to remove. There's just a small screw that caps it off. There's no washer or O-ring on it. Once you remove that, you should be able to get a small flathead in there and get that pilot jet removed. Make sure you're inspecting your jets as you remove them as well. You should be able to hold them up to some light and look through them. If you can't see through the jet, you know it's clogged and need to be cleaned. You can also see on mine there's a lot of dirt or sediment built up on the end of it there. When you're removing the main jet, sometimes the emulsion tube likes to come out with it. So what you can do is grab a wrench to hold on to the emulsion tube, and then you should be able to loosen the jet from there. So once you've got your emulsion tube out, there is going to be a brass nozzle that's underneath it. It doesn't usually come out on its own. You'll have to press it out through the diaphragm side of the carburetor. And I'll show you all how to do that once we get to that portion of the disassembly. But for now, you can go ahead and remove your secondary jet. Underneath that is another emulsion tube that's usually pressed in, so you'll have to press that out through the diaphragm side. Now we're going to take out the seat for the needle. There is a bracket that holds this one down on this carburetor. Now, it doesn't usually come out on its own. The way I get them out is I'll take some compressed air and spray that air down the fuel inlet, and then that should pop that seat out for you. You don't want to use pliers on this because you will damage it and have to replace it. Now we're going to remove the diaphragm from the carburetor. There's going to be 4 bolts holding this cap to the top of the carburetor, and underneath that is a spring between the cap and the diaphragm. But everything should just slide out pretty easily. Next, I'm going to remove the needle from the slide. There's just a flathead screw in there holding it down. There's no spring or washer underneath it. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the fuel air mixture screw. The way I've learned to do this is count how many turns clockwise the screw will go until it's fully seated. That'll give you your adjustment that you had it set at. I'm going to just use the factory setting when I go to rebuild these, which is 2 turns out. Above the fuel air mixture screw is going to be your sink port. That screw has a washer under it. Make sure you inspect it and see if it needs to be replaced. Now, because I'm going to be vapor blasting these carburetors, I'm going to be removing the butterflies. If you're just going to be doing a standard ultrasonic cleaning or rebuild, you don't need to remove these, but I'm going to remove them because that glass bead media would get in there if I didn't remove them. You want to be very gentle if you're going to be removing these. Don't use pliers to pull that butterfly out. You will damage it, so make sure you just use light pressure. If you have to stick your finger through the other end and try to get it out, do that instead. The throttle shaft should then be able to be removed from the carburetor. Make sure you keep an eye out for the 2 washers and the E-clip on there. The washer in the middle is plastic. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side and remove the choke butterfly. This one's a lot easier to remove because it just sits on top of the actual shaft itself. Now you will definitely want to inspect this butterfly valve. This one has a flap on it that's spring loaded. When you open that flap, it should retract back. If it doesn't, you need to replace the spring in it. Now you should be able to remove the choke shaft. This one doesn't have any E-clips or washers on it at all. Now I'm going to be replacing these tiny little felt seals that go under these brass caps. I don't show how I get them out in this video, but the best thing to do is to get a flathead screwdriver and carefully pry up those caps. And then you should be able to take a small pick or a toothpick and get in there and pull out the old felt seal if you want to replace them. Now, if you remember earlier, I said we need to remove this brass nozzle in the main jet tube and then the secondary emulsion tube as well. Now, I'm going to use a wooden skewer to push these out. They should pop right out with a little bit of force. You don't want to use a screwdriver. You will damage the brass fittings in there. There's your brass nozzle. And then you can do the same thing with the secondary emulsion tube. This one can be a little bit more stubborn sometimes. You can see it's still got stuck in there a little, so I just lightly pushed it out with my pick. I didn't use any force, it was just enough to push it out. And with that, you're done disassembling your first carburetor. You can follow the same exact steps for the second carburetor. I'm not going to show you how to do that. I'm just going to put it on a time lapse here. Feel free to skip to the next step, which will be us cleaning the actual carburetors. All right, so I've got my parts separated into their containers. So I'm going to be using an aircraft grade aluminum cleaner, and I'll put about a quarter cup of it in each one of these containers, and then I'll fill it up the rest of the way with water. The reason I'm doing it this way is so I use less cleaner in my ultrasonic tank. I do a lot of these carburetor cleanings, so the less I use, the better. And you'll see that once I show you guys the ultrasonic tank. And make sure when you're filling these up, if you do it this way, that the solution does cover your parts completely. All right, you guys, so I've done about an hour in the ultrasonic tank, and we're going to take a look at how these parts look. You can see the water in the tank is still clear and clean, but once we pull out one of these containers, you'll see how dirty it is. The first thing I'm going to look at are my diaphragms. I don't like leaving the diaphragms in this solution for very long just because I'm afraid that the rubber might become damaged or worn from it. So those look good. If you're looking at the rest of your parts and you still see some dirt, grime, and grease built up on them, you can try either rubbing it off or putting them back in the ultrasonic tank for about another hour. Just make sure you flip your parts over and get them oriented differently in there so that way they have a chance to try and get all of that material off of them. All right, so like I said, we're going to be vapor blasting these carburetors. I'm just going to show you the first one that I'm blasting here. I'm using a fine glass bead media, and I'm blasting it about 60 psi for the first pass. Once I go all the way around the carburetor, I'll take a look at it, see if I missed anywhere, go back over those spots, and then I'll kind of pull back a few inches away from the carburetor surface to kind of lower the psi and blend everything together, and then I'll lower the psi down to about 30 to 40 and then do another pass, and that's where you get most of the shine out of vapor blasting. But one thing to keep in mind when you're vapor blasting your carburetors is that you're using a fine glass bead media that is going to get into these passages on these carburetors. So when you are finished vapor blasting them, the cleaning step afterwards is very, very, very important because you don't want to leave any of that glass bead media behind. So in my blasting cabinet, I do have a fresh water rinse. So once I am done blasting my parts, I rinse them off with fresh water. And then I have a water bucket next to my cabinet as well. I will dunk the parts in that water bucket and then take compressed air to them and spray air through every single passage on the carburetor because I don't want to leave any glass bead media behind. And then because I'm still paranoid about it, I take it one step further. Once they're dried, I then spray carburetor cleaner down every single passage and then go back through with compressed air again. And I haven't had any issues as long as I follow those steps. I've tested my carburetors on my bikes before and they have ran perfectly fine. So if you guys have any questions about vapor blasting, please leave them down in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them for you all. I'm still a little bit new to vapor blasting, but I am learning every day and getting better at it. So if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them down in the comments. All right, so we finally finished vapor blasting all of our parts. You can see here how amazing they turned out. I mean, these carburetors weren't even in bad shape before we started, but after the vapor blast, they almost look new. It's insane to me. I also went ahead and got some new diaphragm caps. You can see the old ones, the plating was coming off of them, so I just decided to replace them. I also got the mounting bracket blasted, and it looks absolutely fantastic. I'm really happy with how everything came out, and these carburetors are going to look pretty dang good when they're done. Before you do get started, make sure you've got some high quality screwdrivers so that way you don't risk stripping the heads out of your jets when you install them. And also make sure you've just got all your parts organized in front of you so you can get started. Now, the first thing we're going to install is this brass nozzle for the main jet. You can see there's two different distinct sides to this nozzle. The side that tapers down and into the nozzle, that's the side you want to put down into the tube first on your main jet, okay? And you'll be able to see the nipple of it stick out through the carburetor, and that's how you know it's been installed correctly. If you don't see that sticking out into your carburetor, it's not installed correctly. And once you do have that in, you can put your emulsion tube in and install the jet on top of that as well. These don't need to be very tight, just slightly hand tight, nothing crazy. You don't need to torque these things to the moon. Next, I'm going to put in the pilot jet. This is the number 15 jet. It goes in the hole to the left of the main jet, if you're looking at it in the orientation I am. I know it's hard to see, but I put that down that left hole, not that one closest to me. Next, I'm going to install the secondary emulsion tube. This is installed a specific way, okay? And I'm going to try to do my best to show you here. But there's a hole that goes through the head of this emulsion tube. You can see right there. It goes right through it. That hole needs to be lined up with the ball on that carburetor there, and then the jet next to it as well. So it should go just like that when you put it in. Again, it just lines up directly with that jet and the ball that's on the carburetor wall there. You can either try to drop it in. Sometimes you won't get it exact, but if you need to move it around in there before you press it in, just grab like a pick or something to grab onto it, and so you can turn it in there a little, and then you should be able to press it in with a wooden skewer or something along those lines. And then we'll put the 68 jet right on top of that as well. Next, we're going to install the screw that caps off that small pilot jet, the number 15 one. This doesn't have an O-ring or a washer on it. It just caps off that jet. Um, Keep in mind, there's another screw that looks very similar to this one, and it's the sync port screw. It is slightly larger, so it won't fit into the threads of this pilot hole. So make sure you're using the correct screw. Next, I'm going to put my seat down into the carburetor. I've replaced the O-ring on it, and sometimes they'll pop right in, but if they don't, just put a tiny bit of grease on it, a very small amount, and it should slide right into your carburetor for you. Next, we're going to install our first new part here from the rebuild kit, and that's the needle. This usually needs to be replaced because that button on top either gets seized or it loses its full range of motion and can't push that float back up to the top anymore. So to install this, you just have to slide the hanger over the notch that's in your float there. I know it's going to be kind of difficult to see, but there's a little notch in the center there, and there's a hanger on your needle that'll just slip right over that, just like that, and then you can go ahead and install that into your carburetor. So go ahead and grab the pin that holds your float in place and install that. And from there, we're going to go ahead and do a quick test before we go any further. We're going to test to make sure that the needle is seating down into the carburetor correctly. You can already see it's working better now because that float is actually bouncing up and down. So that's a good indicator it's working, but we want to make sure it's sealing and not letting fuel in when it's closed. So I'm going to use a brake bleeder valve, and I'm just going to take some fuel line, pop it onto the fuel inlet, and then add 5 to 10 psi. You don't really want to go much more than that. But when you add that psi, it should stay held there in that same spot. It shouldn't be leaking or anything. If it's leaking, your needle or your seat is leaking, and that you'll have to take a look at that. But make sure it's not leaking. Next, we're going to go ahead and measure our float height and adjust them accordingly if they're not within spec. The manual says that these need to be within 16.5 millimeters to 18.5 millimeters. So I'm going to grab a ruler that measures in centimeters, and I'm going to measure from the flange there, from the base of that flange to the top of that float. And that should measure between 16.5 to 18.5 millimeters. I'm holding it at the side, so it's going to look slightly off, but it's pretty dang close to 18 millimeters. And so we're just going to leave them there for now. Don't be like me. I forgot to put the bracket that holds the seat down after I checked to make sure the needle was holding pressure. This bracket needs to be installed a specific way. You can see it bends down in one direction, so you want to make sure the downward bend goes towards the seat when you install this. And then there's a bolt with a locking washer that will hold that in place. Now that we've got all our jets installed, our float height set, and our needle has been checked for pressure, we're going to install a new gasket on our float bowl. Sometimes the kits are always different with these rebuilds, so sometimes the gaskets are too small, sometimes they fit right, or sometimes they're too big. Mine was just a little small, so I just stretched it out very slightly, and then I'm going to set the carburetor down onto the bowl so the gasket doesn't fall out, and then from there I'll just hold it in place and install my 4 screws. Now I'm going to install the drain screw on my float bowl, and this does have an O-ring that goes onto it, so make sure you replace that O-ring before you do get it installed. Next, we're going to install this choke stop, I guess you could call it. It's just a bracket that holds the choke valve opened or closed for you. And this can only be installed one way, so make sure you get it on in the orientation I'm showing you. Next, we're going to install our sync port screw. Remember, this one does have a washer on it, and your rebuild kit should come with a new one, so you should use the new washer instead of the old one. Next, I'm going to be installing the throttle assembly. The first thing we need to do is insert this shaft into the carburetor. It just screws in right to the side. There's only one hole it can go into. So next you're going to grab the bracket and the nut that secure this shaft to the carburetor. You're going to have to pull those tabs back holding that nut on in place, and then you'll be able to install it on your carburetor. And then once it's on there, you can just take some pliers and push those clamps back into the nut. Next, you're going to install this plastic washer onto the shaft. And now you're ready to install the throttle with the spring. And you can see it's installed just like this. There is a plastic bushing underneath the spring. You want to make sure that that is in place correctly. And then the spring will just hold on to the throttle there on the end of it. And then you can see there's a different kind of end of the spring there. There's a different loop on the end of the spring there. That's going to grab onto the side of the carburetor body right here. So make sure when you go ahead and slide this on that you get that lined up first. And then what you're going to do is you're going to wind this clockwise, and it's going to get hung up on the idle adjustment bracket there. So you're going to have to carefully just kind of pull it out, get it to slide past while cranking it clockwise, and then it'll seat right down in place. And that'll mean you have it installed correctly. Next, make sure you put your next plastic washer over there, followed by the metal washer, and then you're going to have an E-clip that holds everything in place for you. Next, I'm installing these throttle shaft seals, and in hindsight, I should have done this before installing the throttle action on the carburetor because it would have made it a little bit easier to get my screwdriver in there or my flathead to pry those flanges open. But you'll see here, I'm going to take a small flathead and start prying those out ever so slightly. It doesn't take a lot of force. They're very soft, so don't don't rip on them because you will destroy them very easily. Sometimes these fall off in the ultrasonic cleaner too, in which case you're going to have to epoxy them back onto your carburetor. Mine didn't come off, thankfully, so I'm just going to pry these flanges out just very slightly until they're about flush with the top of that flange, and then your felt seal should be able to slide in pretty easily from there. So keep in mind with your 360 carburetors, you're going to have two different size felt seals. The smallest one is for the choke shaft, and the larger one will be for the throttle shaft. So it'll take a little bit of patience to get them in there, but just slowly work them in with a pick or a flathead and then round them off in there, and they should be able to get seated fairly easily. Next, I just take the end of my pick or flathead screwdriver, something rounded that'll fit in there, and then I just kind of round out the flange down in there so it holds the seal in place. Next, we'll go ahead and install the needle into our slide. Remember, there's no spring or washer that goes with this needle down there. You just have to slide it down, and then there is a flathead brass screw that will cap that off for you. Now, when you go to install the diaphragm, they are installed a specific way. You'll see a notch on the rubber portion of your diaphragm, and there's a notch on the head of your carburetor. So you got to make sure that those line up. Uh, just a tip for installing these, I find it easier to have the rubber facing down towards the carburetor. You can put your finger down the center and then just slide it in, and it should seat down in the grooves fairly nicely. From there, grab your spring, grab your diaphragm cap, and then make sure the spring seats around the center of your diaphragm cap. And then you can go ahead and bolt that down. Now, to make sure your slide is working correctly, on the intake side of the cold side of the carburetor, you want to blow air into that small crevice on the top there, and that'll cause your slide to come up as you're blowing air into it. And then as soon as you stop, the slide should come right back down. So make sure your slide moves smoothly up and down before you go ahead and install that diaphragm on there for good. Next, we're going to go ahead and install the choke shaft. This is pretty easy to install. There's no washers or E-clips on it. It will just slide right in. Remember to make sure it goes through the side that has that little bracket that'll hold onto the choke for you. Now we can go ahead and install the butterfly for the choke. Remember, this one has a flap on the back of it that retracts back with a spring. If it doesn't retract back when you open it, that means your spring is bad and you need to replace it. So if it's not doing exactly what mine is doing, you need to replace your spring. So when you go to install this, there is a specific way you need to install them. The chokes are a lot easier because the flap goes towards the diaphragm. But if you really want to get down to it, you can look at the side of them and you'll see that the top and bottom of that butterfly is tapered in one direction. So that means when it's opening, it creates a seal against the rounded part of the carburetor body. So you want to make sure you install these correctly. With the chokes, like I said, they're a lot easier because they really can only go in one way, just like you're seeing here. But with the butterfly for the throttle shaft, you're going to see that one needs to be put in the correct orientation or you will have some issues. Now, the screws that hold these butterflies in have notches on the back of them that spread to keep them locked in place. I'm not going to be spreading those. I'm just going to use a little bit of red Loctite to hold them in place. I just don't want to damage the screws or the threads on the shaft by banging on them or anything like that. So I'm just going to use a little bit of red Loctite and they'll be good to go. They shouldn't need to come back out in the future for a long time. So next we're going to go ahead and install the throttle shaft. There's going to be an E-clip that goes on here followed by a plastic washer and then a metal washer. Now, when you are installing this, there are going to be two slits you see on the shaft. One is larger than the other. That's the shaft you want facing towards you when you insert this into your carburetor. And you can just kind of see how I have it oriented on mine there. Now you'll grab your butterfly valve and remember what we were saying about those ends being tapered to one direction. So you got to see what direction your throttle opens that butterfly so that way you can line those bevels up with the inside of your carburetor. So in this case, this carburetor opens clockwise. So when that butterfly opens, it's going to be coming towards us. The top will be coming towards us. So we need that bevel to go down towards the inside of the carburetor when we install this. Make sure you're not trying to force it in there. It'll take a little bit of finagling to get it seated down in there, but you don't need to force it. Just work with it and be patient. Next, we're going to go ahead and link our throttle to the butterfly shaft. You're going to take this bridge that connects those two shafts together and you're going to put the largest plunger in first. And you'll notice on both sides there's a hole, and one hole is larger than the other. The larger hole you want to go down towards the actual carburetor. Once you do have that attached, you are going to grab your spring and plunger. The plunger goes in first, followed by the spring, and the plunger does seat inside the spring. And then you're going to grab your bracket and the bolt that will hold all of that together. And then make sure you clamp the tabs down on your bolt once you have it fully tightened down. The last step here is going to be to install our two plastic washers and two E-clips that'll keep this linkage connected together. Now, sometimes during the ultrasonic cleaning process, the cap that goes over that throttle shaft will fall out and you'll have to either replace it, or if yours isn't damaged, you can go ahead and seat it back in there. A 7mm socket should fit in there nicely, and then just lightly tap that in there. It does not take a lot of force. You don't want to ruin these caps because otherwise you're going to have to replace them. Last step for us is going to be to replace the fuel air mixture screw. Go ahead and replace the O-ring that goes on it. From there, you can put the spring on and then go ahead and fully seat that screw into your carburetor. The factory setting for this is 2 full turns out from fully seated. That is about where they were set when I had removed them during disassembly, so that is where we're going to set them, and they might need a little bit of tweaking once they're on a motorcycle. The last thing I didn't show you all is the installation of the idle adjustment screw. I will put up a picture here for you all to see so you can see how that looks and where that installs to. And then just keep in mind you will need to remove one of the actual float bowl screws so you can mount the idle adjustment screw bracket down onto the carburetor as well. From there, you should have a fully assembled carburetor. You can follow those same steps to assemble your second carburetor. And then when you need to uh, link them together with the mounting bracket, remember there's that little spring that goes in between the throttle shafts once you push those two carburetors together. And then that choke bridge will be able to slip onto the first carburetor as long as you still have it connected to your second carburetor. If you guys have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. Appreciate you all watching. If you made it to the end, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe for more content. Thanks again, and you all have a good one.